Broadcasting from the commodity capital of the world, Zurich, Switzerland, this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
This edition to Insider's Guide to Energy is brought to you by Fidectis. Go to www.fidectis.com for more information.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy. I'm your host, Chris Sass, and today I'm sitting in Boston, Massachusetts, sitting in the seaport at Enel North America with Joel Obillo.
Yes.
Joel, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having us here, Chris.
Well, I'm excited to be here. I love the location. If our audience had a view, if this wasn't a podcast, they'd be looking out the window, seeing an amazing seaport view, a great location. But we're really not here to talk about Boston. We're going to talk a little bit about what Enel has done and what you've done with the organization and what you do. So you're the head of sales and marketing at Enel North America. That's kind of a broad statement.
Right.
I think what might be interesting for our audience is to figure out a little bit about who you are first before we go into the conversation. Then let's talk about your company.
Sure. So Joel Obillo recently moved into this new role of head of sales and marketing for the integrated sales organization in Enel North America. But my background has really been specifically in energy around demand response. I joined Enel through the Enel acquisition in 2017. My role, most of my roles leading up to 2017 and even after 2017 was managing demand response programs in the US and Canada, even the UK and Ireland, and some of those years as well.
So 2017 is a while ago. Demand response. So I think there's been lots that's happened since then.
Yes.
How popular was it in 2017? Who were your big customers? Was it big industrials that were doing that at the time, or who were you working with?
Pretty much the same customers that we are dealing with today. Large industrials. But really, if you think at our core set of customers, these are mid-size, light industrial customers, cold storage facilities, smaller size data centers, and the like. Don't get me wrong, we also have large refineries, big data centers, and the like.
Yep.
But we have over 3,500 accounts here in the US, 10,000 sites all across North America.
So you got 3,500 accounts. You guys have been in North America since 5 years or so, or?
Oh, way more than that. So Enel was founded early 2000s, and we've certainly grown that business since it was founded, and even after our acquisition, we have only expanded that business, not just in demand response, but added new technologies like storage and the like.
You've been in the U.S. since about 2000 from Enel's point of view.
Right.
You sound like you have a pretty rich customer base.
Right.
And I think in our pre-conversation, you talked about this new role that you're in, and you're bringing a bunch of pieces together. So you started your conversation saying, hey, this is who I am. I did demand response. I jumped in saying, hey, that's pretty cool. I bet it's evolved a lot since 2017.
Yes.
What else are you doing?
Well, so Enel has been around in the US since 2000. And it started with the green power generation business. Like any traditional utility, there is usually a generation arm, which is Enel Green Power. In the US, we also have our trading arm, also pretty common in many of these traditional utilities. And then we have what we call the NLX business, which really engages end users. Our core end users here in the US are commercial and industrial customers. Not uncommon for these large companies is for each of these organizations to have their own sales organization, their own origination teams. Well, what we've done differently recently is we said, hey, why don't we put those teams together as a single sales organization? Now, you might ask, why do that? And I think we've come to a realization that our objective here is to be able to put ourselves in a better position to help our customers. And we want to put all the strengths that we have on the table so that they can access it. It will be available to them so that they can leverage all those services.
All right, so you've rationalized three distinct sales organizations into a single sales organization with the concept that there's better access to resources by having
Correct.
a single point of contact. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
100%. But there's more than just a single point of contact. I think internally, we are also changing mindsets here for everyone. I'll give you an example. Enel Green Power, back in the day, would always build power plants where it made sense to build power plants. Texas, MISO, SPP, and whatnot. Well, what we're doing by saying, let's have a single sales organization, and now we are going to be customer-led. We are going to privilege regions where we have customers. So if we have a lot of customers in Texas, and we do, we are going to privilege Texas as an area where we are going to build our generation fleet. We have a lot of customers in PJM. Well, what that means for us is we are going to build a lot more generation there. Clean generation, green electrons, because what we are hearing from our customers is that is what they want. That is what they're looking for.
And so what is the U.S. market looking at? So our audience is about half North America and half Europe. I've just spent 3 weeks traveling around in North America, and it seems to be a bit behind, candidly, what I see in Europe for green energy and resources. Now, I've been meeting with green tech leaders and folks along the way, so they're not out of the game. There's certainly a lot of things happening. What's the market looking like? What's the landscape in greening of energy?
Well, number one, you are spot on. We are behind. We only have around 20% renewables penetration here in the US. We have a long way to go, which is why we're very optimistic about the prospects of our generation arm. There's a lot to do on the regulatory side, too. And there's a lot to do, honestly, in just getting people even a little more comfortable with the idea of having more intermittent resources in their grids. I was just in Texas, Chris, actually, a couple of days ago, and I was meeting with commissioners and ERCOT, and a big concern for them today is really reliability, for reasons we all know. I actually started my career in ENERNOC in demand response, managing the Texas program there. And the peak load of Texas back in the day was like less than 70 gigawatts. 2 weeks ago, they hit 80 gigawatts. 10 gigawatts over the last 10 years was added to their peak. That is the equivalent of a peak load of New York City. So it's like telling Texans, I'm going to grow a city there as big as New York, and I'm going to do it in less than 10 years. In fact, 5 gigawatts grew in the last 2 to 3 years. Right?
So what was the concern? So it sounds like a success story. Now, if I remember, Texas early, when George Bush was still president, early got into the renewable game. It kind of had a false start, perhaps, and then it had some setbacks. And then we know the more recent history
Right.
with the renewables in Texas. So what's the concern then? You're telling a positive story to me. What I'm hearing you say is it's great growth.
Well, it's great growth, but the concern is the transition. The concern is every technology has their constraint. Whether that's wind, whether that's solar, thermal also has their constraints. So I think the concern is growth is accelerating in Texas for a variety of reasons: the economy, the weather, population. How might we keep up to ensure that we still have a reliable grid while responding to what consumers want, which is a decarbonized grid as well? So how do you manage those different needs? Gartner has a very good framework, I think, in by the way they look at this, not just from a grid perspective, but even from a commercial and industrial customer perspective. They're saying there are three things that we hear from C&I customers. One, it has to be affordable. So costs need to be under control for energy. The second one is it needs to be available. It needs to be reliable. It's something that you can count on. Now, for some folks, that is more important than costs. Very often, we hear costs as the priority. But the other leg here, the other pillar, is it needs to be acceptable. And what they mean by acceptable is our customers and our employees want it. And we all know that folks want a decarbonized grid, that people want this to be cleaner, that we should be doing our share. So how do you balance all those three pillars that can sometimes be competing?
And so you asked the question, so what is Enel doing to try to balance those pillars?
Enel is the largest renewable privately owned renewable player in the world. We are also the largest owner and operator of flexible assets in the world. That is not an accident. The way you solve it is you have to manage both supply and you have to both manage demand. You cannot disrupt the generation mix and not disrupt and change the demand mix, or at least how demand responds to these changes. So our strategy, which ties in with our own sales strategy and our go-to-market strategy, is you go to customers on both these fronts. And you have to be able to do it at scale.
So what about storage? Where does that play in? So obviously demand response is there, right? And assume, maybe this is an assumption that North America internet coverage is good, so you can get rapid feedback from devices in substation level or even further down to make quick choices or machine speed choices.
Right.
What about storage though?
Storage is on both sides of the equation again. Every power plant that we are building today will always have a storage component. We are not just building a solar farm, it is going to be a solar plus storage farm. Right? Our aspirations is by 2024, we will have 1.4 gigawatts of storage around our power plants. We are also building a behind-the-meter storage portfolio, building it on-site with our customers. We have about 100, 150 megawatts a day. In 10 years, that will be about 1.4, 1.5 gigawatts. So you need to bring those technologies on both sides. You need to make them accessible to your customers.
So when you put behind the meter out for an industrial site, are they leasing the facilities? Are they buying the facilities? Is it yours? Is it an Enel asset that just happens to be sitting on their location?
We're ready to do whatever the customer wants. We have some customers who just give me the batteries, but maintain it for me, operate it for me. We engage them in that kind of relationship. We also, the other end of this is, Mr. Customer, you don't pay a single penny for that battery. We will operate it and we will share on the savings. And what we found is customers, depending on where they are, may want either option A or option B or something in between.
So are there any states or provinces where this is working better right now, where that model is stronger?
The economics is currently viable in markets like Ontario and Canada. We've seen some use cases in New York, California, and Massachusetts. Now, there's a lot of news recently around, I will call it Build Back Better, but it's a different version of Build Back Better. Yeah. We believe if those incentives do come through, that new markets will open up here in the U.S.
And how competitive a landscape is the U.S.? So you're a large player, but you're not the only player, and there's legacy players that have legacy infrastructure as well.
Right.
What's the competition like in North America?
Oh, it's very competitive. As in any market, it's very competitive. And we like that. We like the competition. We like the competition because our competition and our customers push us to become better. In my experience, having done this for close to 15 years, the competition has only increased and intensified.
So is the competition driving change, or is what's already developed on the truck today able to meet the need, and it's just a question of deploying it? Is there an innovation that's holding you back right now that we're on the cusp of, or are we at a point where this could go full scale if there was a mindset to do it at full scale?
I think there are economic considerations that is preventing us from doing this in full scale. That's number one. There are supply chain constraints. Certainly the technology is there. Certainly the technology is there. But we want the technology to evolve too. A lot of people talk about long duration storage, which will have future applications. But our belief is in this near term, in this transition, we have the technologies available to help bridge us to where we need to be.
So changing gears a little bit, you're on the sales side of the equation. So you're going to meet folks at these enterprises, large enterprises. What skill sets do they have in-house to handle this? Do they have the new officers in place or the right person in charge to manage their energy policies going forward? Are you seeing that?
It depends on the customer. We have customers today, big technology firms that have their own energy teams. As I mentioned, our core segment of customers are the mid-sized enterprises. they cannot afford a 20-person energy team, and you don't necessarily need to have a 20-person energy team. They usually either have a sustainability officer, they have a plant manager who's thinking about this the right way, right? And that's what's key for us, is to have those relationships, is to find those people who will be our champions, our internal champions in these companies. Because you have to think of this holistically. This is a complex challenge, right? I mentioned to you, it needs to be affordable, it needs to be available, it needs to be acceptable. You cannot address that complexity with single point solutions. You have to step back and really think about this broadly. And depending on the company, they have more people who can think about this broadly, or some who probably need help from others, partners, who can then bring them to where they need to be.
So do you become that partner, or are there third parties in between you guys? Is your team basically that partner that helps them build their business case, helps them socialize it internally?
One of our philosophies is we meet our customers where we are, or where they are. Right? We will meet our customers where they are. Some have long-standing relationships with a consultant. We're happy to work with them. Some don't have it. Chris, more and more, I'm having conversations with customers who have said to us, my management has set a decarbonization goal by 2030 or 2035. And I'm all for it, but I really don't know how to get there.
Got it.
I don't know where point A is. I only know point B, and I don't know how to get to point B. And we're ready to go in there and say, all right, let's have a workshop about this. Let's workshop this. And let's talk to you all about how we might get buy-in, not just from your immediate management, but ultimately to the folks on the shop floor. Because we need everyone's participation in order to get this done.
And so you have 3,000 plus folks that have already gone down this journey, is what you said, or companies have gone down that journey. What's the demand right now in the market? So it looks like the economy is getting a little bit tighter. I think people aren't really optimistic about the next few months or next 12 months, maybe. Interest rates going up. There's all kinds of things there. What does that mean for your customer base when you're talking to them?
I'll say two things.
And what does that mean for greening of energy?
Right. I'll say two things. I think one, we know demand for these services have only increased. We also know that there's a lot of nervousness around where energy prices have gone. And because of that volatility, again, people are concerned about, can this be affordable? So if anything, whether there's a recession or not, and this, I think, has only put those concerns at the forefront.
And then are customers still using PPAs and tools like that right now? Is that what you're saying, mid-enterprise, so maybe they're too small for that?
There's a segment of customers that utilize PPAs. To your point, there's also a segment of customers who want to be a bigger part of that, right? Or at least I want access to that as well. We have some arrangements where you can have a customer that's leading this and they pull some of their vendors with them as part of that PPA. We think that's a very innovative way to do this. Some of what we are hearing from customers is, I'm comfortable doing a PPA, but I'm not comfortable to a 10-year commitment. Well, that's great. Let's think about ways by which we can shorten the tenor and make this a bit more accessible to you. And that's, again, why we love this idea of bringing all these sales teams together, because we have to think about it from our customer's perspective, number one, but it really requires tying all those three strengths, green power, our trading group, and the NLX, all together, selling to the customer and figuring this out with the customer.
Do you see traditional energy providers having a baseload value for some period of time? So are we going to see natural gas still going? Are we going to see nuclear or other technologies that you see as part of the solution for the time being?
As with any transition, I wouldn't recommend doing, just switching it off. I think you're going to have to turn it down smartly. Right? So if the question you're asking is, do I think thermal generation should be removed from the grid tomorrow? Definitely not. They have a role to play, and they will continue to have a role to play. But we also know that we cannot rely on them if we want to decarbonize our grids.
That's just curious what you're seeing in the market, right? So I get your direct relationship with the customers, but I'm also trying to get a feel for, holistically, you're in the market every day talking to folks. So yes. I'm looking more for your expertise across North America. Mm-hmm. You know, what are some of the trends and things we're seeing, right? And I think we tapped a little bit on what we're doing in the conversation. So what's next step? So what hurdle or gate are we at right now to keep going? What's the challenges right now, or what are the challenges? Excuse me.
There's always the regulatory challenge.
Can you be more specific when you say regulatory? Because realize we have audience that isn't necessarily in North America, may not know all our regulations.
Right.
So give us some examples of some of the hurdles.
Sure. I mean, we have frameworks that were designed for a thermal generator. Well, we all know that doesn't necessarily fit an intermittent resource. If I have a 4 megawatt hour battery, meaning it can run for it can deliver for 4 hours, a megawatt. We have some regulations today that says that is not a reliable resource. You are disqualified from participating in the wholesale market. And the question we have is, what problem are you solving for? Right? Are you solving for a 24-hour problem? Or are you really solving for a 4 megawatt hour problem when the sun is setting and you need that extra generation to shore it up? In many instances, those are the kinds of issues that our grids are trying to solve. And we believe that these smaller size, shorter duration batteries have a role to play, and you should let them in the market. But the way some of these markets are being designed is those types of assets are being discounted. And those are sort of the challenges. There's a lot of discussions around, and I don't know if your audience knows about this, but ELCCs, right? Load carrying capability. And my personal view is, I think that is a reasonable framework, a reasonable way to look at these assets. My issue is they only apply ELCCs to renewables, but they don't apply it to thermal generation. You should apply that equally. Every technology has their own constraint. If you're going to apply ELCC on renewables, well, you better apply it to thermal.
So how much effort does an organization like yours have to do with lobbying and FERC and other organizations? I mean, right. How much of your time is spent with regulators?
Fortunately, we have two teams that spend a lot of time, government affairs, institutional affairs. And that is what they do every day. Of course, I get pulled in. We pull in some of our experts also when we're needed. I always view these teams more like a market development team because they are developing markets. I mentioned to you, Chris, that I was just at ERCOT a couple of days ago, and someone on ERCOT staff made a comment about us being troublemakers. And so I said, I'm sorry if we are troublemakers. And I said, Joel, I'm just kidding. You're not troublemakers, you're problem solvers. I always view you as problem solvers. We need you to come in here with solutions that may sometimes be, if you will, challenging for some folks. But we need you to be problem solvers because the solutions that we need in order to solve our problems for the future are not solutions that we had yesterday. And they recognize that there's a lot of catching up that needs to be done.
So I guess one of the regulatory, I had Meredith Angwin on a program a while ago, and I don't know if you've read Shorting the Grid by her book or whatever. And I think one of the problem statements she was talking about with regulation is for base load, and she give the use case of like a winter storm or something like that, is also talking about regulations that made sense about fuel storage online, so you could have base load during an event. Are you seeing that kind of load handled by batteries? Is that what you said by your previous, that you think batteries can meet some of that demand today, that they're up for the task at this point, but they're not able to do that?
They can certainly shore up the grid for conditions such as the one you described, or like I mentioned, when the sun is setting and demand is going up. But those inflection points can be managed by those shorter duration assets. You don't need a 24-hour battery for that. You don't. And that's why, like I mentioned to you earlier, in this current transition, we have the technology, we have the assets. Regulatory challenges are there, and that's one of the things that's preventing us from adopting this more in a broader scale. Supply chain is also a problem. Permitting is a problem. That tends to slow us down in some instances.
So are those problems getting better? Do you see that there's inertia to change that over time? I mean, I wouldn't expect to move a big ship overnight, that make a hard right, but you start turning. Do you see the course correction coming?
We are seeing improvements.
Okay. Very political answer, by the way. Very nice, very nice. It's probably not as fast as some might want, is what I'm hearing you say.
100%.
So then the second thing is, what speculatively do you do? So do you go out and build capacity, understanding the demand curve is just going such, or is this all in your line of work, working for behind the meter on very specific sites?
We do a lot of things in terms of, if I understood your question correctly, where we are exploring and experimenting on new things. We have, for example, a business development team in green power that is solely focused on hydrogen. Now, I'm not the best person to talk to you about hydrogen. I can tell you that our customers are interested in hydrogen. And usually when that happens, we bring this team to just help them think about it. Like, how might you think about it? It may not be economic for your current needs, but we see a path there in the future. And here's what you can do as you get there. So we do those things for sure.
I guess my question is more about capacity. So let's go back to just green electron type of thing. I mean, maybe you're using hydrogen to make green electrons, which would be fine as well. But do you put capacity in place, understanding that the demand curve is there right now? Are you building capacity speculatively, I guess is my question, or are you waiting until you're a sales guy, right? So you signed a contract, now we put capacity in.
No, then we do it speculatively. We have a view that we need to build 8 more gigawatts of wind and solar here in the US, and that is our plan through 2024. Do we necessarily have the customers now? Absolutely not. Right? So we are going to build that with.
So you bid on the permits, and you're doing all that speculative to make sure you have the capacity. Is what I'm hearing you say.
Correct.
Cool. So I guess, tell me some other interesting anecdote of some success story that you've had. So we've talked pretty broad brushstrokes. I'd love to hear something like a use case where it was a huge success, a story that you'd want to share with the audience.
Here's a recent success story, Chris. 2 weeks ago, we had an emergency dispatch in Texas. And what that means is there was not enough capacity to support the grid as demand peaked.
Due to the heat wave?
Due to the heat wave.
Okay.
Now, in some cases, that might lead to a blackout. I'm pointing to this example because, again, you see all our strengths here coming into play. We had wind farms and solar farms that were supposed to do what they were supposed to do. Our storage assets that were on site in those wind farms and solar farms provided the reserves that ERCOT needed, and our demand response portfolio also delivered what it needed to deliver. And just seeing those things come together, do what it was supposed to do, I think reinforces what I've been asserting here time and again. We have the solutions in place to lead this transition. And it's just really a matter of bringing it all together, connecting all those dots.
How does the ecosystem work with competitors in that situation? So you had a heat event,
yes.
You had increased demand, you've got multiple vendors or solutions in the market, right? Where you get commodity of electricity. How does it play together? How does demand response work across your competitors and yourselves? Is it everyone in and on their own, or is there some sort of organized effort there?
it's really ERCOT that's going to call the shots in those emergencies. And they may call on market participant A and market participant B. The situation we had 2 weeks ago, they were calling on everyone. And really, the best market participant really would rise above the rest. We know we have competitors whose portfolio did not deliver what it was supposed to deliver. They will be assessed penalties as a result. So there's a market that does that. There's a market that will dictate who does what they're supposed to do. But you also have this grid operator, that's also going to say, hey, you did not deliver what you're going to be in the penalty box.
Got it. So we've talked a lot about Texas. You mentioned casually that Ontario was an area where there's things that happen. So our neighbors to the north. What are some of the nuances of doing this kind of work in Ontario? What's different in Canada than the US? Other than they have a lot of nice base load.
Their structure is different. And their value streams it's actually a good example. In Ontario, the demand charge, which is, if you will, the maximum amount that you consume, right, is off, and you have a lot of payments on your utility bill that's reckoned against that maximum usage that you have in a given hour or given 4 hours. Depends on the framework. In Canada, it's a meaningful amount. It can be anywhere between $300,000 or $500,000 per megawatt. That is a perfect use case for a battery. Because if I can predict when that will happen and I lower my usage, I can deliver a lot of savings for our customers. Which is why Ontario is a big market for us and where this is viable. I'm highlighting this because when you think about value streams or value that you can deliver to customers, very often people think, oh, bring it to the market, bring it to CAISO, bring it to ERCOT, bring it to PJM, bring it to the ISO. At Enel, we think that is just only one possible way to drive value. That those peak demand charges can be meaningful. A lot of value can be captured there.
But I think that's early. I mean, peak shaving is kind of early battery use. That was the first use cases that made a lot of sense for people, right?
Right.
So, I mean, that one's been around for a bit, but it sounds like it's more applicable in the Canadian market than that's more meaningful in Canada. So you get a quicker return on that. That's what
right.
It sounds like you're saying.
Right.
Now, you don't mention Mexico. Does that fall into a different region? Is that outside of your region? Is that why we don't talk about Mexico much?
We have a presence in Mexico. It's certainly not a focus for my sales organization today.
It's a different region.
Yes.
Just curious. Well, I think the different examples are pretty interesting. I guess you talked about meaningful cost structure in Canada, so driving the behavior through cost. I think it goes back to the regulatory conversation you started earlier in the interview. Where do you go from here? So you've brought all these organizations together. You've got some inherent value by putting them together, but it's relatively a new structure for you guys. So what are you looking to do going forward?
Well, first, we want to rationalize our customer view. And what I mean by that is we have to segment our customers and determine who is ready for what. So we're going to have a lot of conversations with our customers in the next 12 to 18 months. We need to assess where they are and what their needs are. And then we're going to do some problem solving with them together. And I personally believe that we have a lot of these services available today that they can take advantage of. I also personally believe that there are a lot more products and services that we haven't developed, that we may need to partner with somebody else, or we certainly need to partner with our customers to figure out. And maybe we already have the resources. It's just a matter of connecting the dots. That is an area that I am really excited about. Can't wait to have those customer conversations, see where they are, meet them where they are, and create those new solutions to address the problems and challenges that they're facing.
How big an organization is Enel in North America?
Right. We have about 1,600 employees to date. We are hiring 100 FTEs a month. last 2 to 3 months, that has been the rate of growth that we've been on track. We only expect that to grow even faster. So I'm glad you're bringing this topic up, because talent has been an area that is becoming increasingly important for us.
So what skill sets does someone looking to be a part of this energy transformation, or let's say someone going to a team like your team, what would they bring to the table? What skill sets do you look for?
Chris, I'm glad you're asking that question. If you look at our team today, and a lot of the teams, both at Enel North America, whether that's Green Power, or whether that's NLX, or the trading team, and you look at their undergraduate degrees, it's all sorts of undergraduate degrees. I'm an economics major. There's someone on my team who's a government major. There's someone on the team who's an engineer, business, psychology, all sorts of degrees. So while of course we need engineers, yes, we need folks who are commercially minded, what we have discovered is that the best people, the ones who stay here for a very long time, are the ones who really believe in the mission that we're doing. That we are here to help solve the problem of climate change. You ask any person on the team, what drew you here in the first place? It was always that. So to answer your question, what kind of skills we're looking for? I would say we're looking for mission-oriented people who really believe in what we are doing and want to contribute and make a difference.
Well, cool. Sounds like you've got a lot of jobs to fill. It sounds like it's going to be a challenge going forward. From the podcast, we know there's a lot of people that are passionate about energy, that live and breathe energy and understand the energy transformation. It's important to them. As we kind of wind up the interview, any thoughts to bring this together? I mean, if from our audience point of view, we've talked about North America, we've talked about behind the meter, we've talked about Enel's role in this, you've talked about staffing. How do you bring this together? What do you want to leave the audience thinking at the end of this interview today?
I would love for them to think that we are only getting started here. We need to become exponentially more sophisticated to do what needs to be done. So we need a lot of creative people. And if there are folks in the audience listening to this today, you're probably listening to this today because you're very interested in this industry. I hope you stay in the industry and you continue to be interested, and that you find new opportunities. You will certainly find a lot of opportunities here at Enel. Go to our website, check the jobs that we have that's interesting. I will make myself available to them as well for quick conversations if they want to learn more about this. But you're in the right industry. We need more folks like you to help us in this mission.
Well, cool. So I appreciate that. That's I think great. I think you probably volunteered yourself. Your phone may light up. Always be careful what you ask for, because sometimes you get it. That's what I've learned along the way. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been enlightening, understanding a little bit more about the North American renewable situation or where it's going. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having us, Chris.
And for our audience, this concludes another episode of Insider's Guide to Energy. We hope you've enjoyed this content as much as I have producing it. If you have, please share it, subscribe, forward it, and never forget to comment. The comments are important, and we will respond. We'll talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.